I'll try and keep this fairly brief. Candace asked me to speak about myself, which I'm really uncomfortable doing. So I will tell you a bit about myself, and then I'll tell you a bit about the ship. If you can't hear me in the back, please just put your hand up or just tell me to speak louder, because I tend to mumble at times, particularly when I lose track of what I'm going to say. Okay. So in the fall of 2000, I was living in Kingston, Ontario with my wife. She was finishing up her residency at Queen's. I was on top of the world. I was chief mate on the Bluenose. Been there for 14 or 15 years. And life was good. Had a 2-bedroom walk up in downtown Kingston. We were locals at a pub. Life was wonderful. In the winter of 2001, so after Christmas, my life changed quite dramatically. My son was born. So that, as any of you have kids know, that all of a sudden you're not the most important person in the world anymore, and who cares if you're chief mate? You just got to change the diaper. Actually, I wasn't chief mate anymore. I'd been promoted to captain on the ship. So then I had two new cares to look after. And the other thing that happened was a really small thing. It was in the paper. There was a dad and 2 sons playing hockey in the driveway. And the guy that looked after the Stanley Cup was driving past. He stopped, he took out the Stanley Cup, and he said, next person who scores wins the Stanley Cup. Right? So just, to me, so then I'm sort of been put in the idea of caring for something bigger than me and my son and the ship. And then there's this sort of icon that has stopped in downtown Kingston. And I can't tell you how many times I won the Stanley Cup. Over time, clock running out in my driveway. So to have that there, I guess I was receptive to the message of icons and what they can actually mean. And what they can do as a sort of gathering point for heritage and for culture and for our communities. And then you also realize how small things that happen to kids can change their lives dramatically through the future. Yeah. So when I was 12, my brother and I had a little sailboat, and we would sail around the waters of Mahone Bay. Yes. Yeah. And so I did spend time being captain of the Bluenose when I was a kid as well. So, yeah, so these little things, they're really important in life. And so part of communities, you got to start really young, right? And you got to build it up through. So what does a captain do? I use the word I a lot, but it's never me. There's no I in team, but there is one in captain. So I'm the end of the road quite often. It's my final responsibility to be looking after the ship. But it's also, there's mates and engineers and cooks and communications people and office people. It's a huge team to do it, and I'm at the pointy end of the stick quite often. So we'll just talk a bit about what the captain's job is. So I have to be technically proficient. So right now the ship is on the dock just outside the wharf facing in the harbor. I have to be able to get the ship out, to turn it around 180 degrees in a narrow channel and move it out the bay. Right? That's a technical thing, understanding pivot points and currents and wind and what my engines will and won't do. I have to be a historian. I have to understand why the ship is important. I have to be able to teach that knowledge and share that knowledge to the people around me, both on a technical aspect of this is what we need to do to keep a gaff rig sailing safely, and in the historical aspect of this is what fishing meant to the town of Lunenburg or to Nova Scotia. I had to be competent in computers, just regular computers, to be able to do a spreadsheet or a presentation, and I have to be competent in marine computers. So I have to know how to run a telex machine, how to send satellite messages, how to do radar plotting. It just goes on and on. I have to be a bit of human resources. I have to understand logistics. So that as we move from port to port, I have to make sure that we have enough water, enough fuel, that I've asked the office to make sure that our garbage gets taken away, that there's dockage for us, that there's water in the channel. I have to understand the regulations around the ship, because she floats on a sea of paper at times. We're a regulatory passenger carrying vessel. So that means that, beside the big beautiful thing, that the life rafts have to be good. And right now we're going through this huge technical thing where they're taking apart electric pumps and going in tanks, and so I have to understand all that. I'm a heritage fair judge, It's just at the local school. So being in the community is important. It's a point of the Bluenose that I have to go and be in front of kids, to be in front of people. I have to be a writer. Emily makes sure that I'm in the newspaper at least twice a week with a column. I have to be a video persona. So that's what we're taping this today, and Emily will chew that up somehow and put it out on the social media. I have to be a public speaker, which I find quite difficult. I think Candace asked me if I needed anything today, and it was courage. I need the courage to do this. And I have to be a mentor to the young crew that we have on board every year. So if you want to look at a story that would take all of this and put this all together, a couple of years ago we came through the canal between Cape Breton and the mainland, Canso Causeway. There's a set of locks there, so we have to be able to put the ship in this little narrow space with a deckhand who hasn't done a whole lot of steering on the ship. And so we stick it in there and go at the other side. Sun setting. It's quite a nice evening, but the forecast is for the weather to deteriorate as we're going on. So as you come out, and we're going towards Prince Edward Island now, St. George's Bay is like a big funnel with the lock at the end, and it's basically a straight coast. There's no shelter, there's no place to go and anchor, there's no dock for us to hide to. It's a big funnel with a big lock wall at one end and PEI in Newfoundland at the other. Nice evening, the sun setting over the hills in Cape Breton. It's a beautiful place, beautiful, just staggering. But as the sun sets, cloud starts to build, wind starts to pick up. Look at the forecast. Yep, it's supposed to come around. This will be okay. And it builds, and then the sea is building, and it's getting rougher, and we're running out jack lines for the ship where the crew are wearing harnesses and are hooked onto the ship. And there's no moon because now it's fully covered, and there's white caps, and now there's big seas, and we're still not out of the bay. And the wind is rushing down the bay, and I'm having a hard time to get out of the bay to get to somewhere safe, or at least to put the wind on the stern of the vessel. Wind keeps building. I changed the watch. I'm on deck now with the mate. And it's getting rougher and rougher and rougher, and decide to take in some sail that we can hopefully just pound our way out of the bay, just physically, brutally move out of the bay. And I send the crew up on the foredeck, and there's so much water and spray that the strobe lights on their life jackets are going off, and all I can see is people's strobe lights in the dark. And I can see the sail come down, and I just have to stand at the engine controls with my helmsman at the wheel and just wait until I count each one of those strobe lights coming back to me to know that everybody's safe. Right, so there's the technical. I have to know the weather, I have to be able to handle the ship, and then I have to be able to write about it and speak about it afterwards. Right, so it's that whole package for the captain to do. So how do we get there? How do we take a bunch of young kids and end up in St. George's Bay safely, motored out, went to Pictou the next day? Yeah. So that all starts in February, where the director and the chief mate and I start interviewing young people. We're looking for 14 young people to come and join us. No experience necessary, nothing. Family canoe maybe, maybe not. Maybe have never done anything. If I can find a tree planter or a farm kid, fantastic. But because they've worked hard, right? They've roughed it, they've not been comfortable. But they're looking for nice young people that will come and be a part of our team, part of our community. What I'm hiring them for is 6 months, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, no days off. Right? Not always access to their cell phone. No data. None of this. Yeah, it's hard work. We do give them time off. We give them probably one every 10 days or so. They get a day off. But generally in the season, I get no time off. I think the chief mate last year had 3 days in that 6-month period. So that's difficult to maintain relationships and life. And so when we have a crew picked, some of them you can tell when you're interviewing them, they just about halfway through, and it's not for them. And shorten down the interview a bit and say thank you for your time and move on. Other people join us and And what they think they're signing up for and what they actually sign up for are two completely different things, because there's just no way that they can imagine what it's like to, you know, take 125 blocks apart, or to stand on a raft all day and just scrape just a black wall in front of you and you're just scraping paint all day. And if you're lucky, you get to go back the next day and do it again, and the next day and do it again, and maybe then later in the week you can paint it. So it's hard work. So in the spring, April 1st every year, so Easter Monday, less than a week now, the crew show up in the rigging shed just on the side of the building here, and we start and basically take the ship apart, and we look at everything from the waterline to the top of the masts. So for the crew coming, no experience, no idea what it is, you know, they learn how to varnish, they learn how to paint, learn how to clean a paintbrush. That's not the kitchen, that's not the toilet, that's, you know, they have to learn a whole new ship language. So the office and I always have a disagreement about how much to tell the crew before they show up. You know, I like them to come and be stripped down to nothing. Just that you know nothing here, and for them to have that realization that they're nothing, and then they bond well with their friends and people that know nothing, and then we teach them, you know, that's the sole, that's the deck, that's the mast, that's port, that's starboard, that's a scraper, that's a screwdriver. So when I started, everyone had done physical work of some kind. You'd painted your grandmother's barn, you'd cut wood, you've done something. And now they can all fix my computer. But it's not that people have done manual labor. So we try and build a community within the ship. We try and teach them shipmate self. Shipmate self. If we look after the ship will look after us. If we will look after our shipmates, they will look after us, and then we care for ourselves. If you put self first, then you're only looking after yourself, and your shipmates won't look after you. So we teach them stewardship. That's one of Emily's favorite words. And the idea that we're at service to something bigger than ourselves, right? It's a huge thing, and I think a lesson missing from society and bigger society today. You know, it's important that we would be willing to leave something for others, that we would care for something for others to enjoy. You know, it's the story about the guy planting the tree, that he's never going to sit underneath, right? Is that you're leaving something for the future generation. So we spend 2 months rigging the ship. We put the crew through marine first aid. We put them through how to get in a life raft, how to jump overboard, how to fight a fire, teach them how to put the sails up and down, how to clean toilets, how to wash dishes, how to live on a ship at sea. And that takes about 2 months, somewhere there. And then we go out into the bay and we take the smallest sail, we put it up and down and up and down and up and down and up and down. Then we put 2 up and down and up and down and up and down. And then slowly we get to the point where we get to the picture shot where everything is up. But that means that someone who has never been on a ship in their lives, 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago, is now standing 80 feet above the deck with the ship underneath them swaying, and learning, you know, what it was really like to be at sea on a schooner. So once that's done and we go through a bunch of regulatory inspections, what do we do with the ship? So we're here in town, we do harbor tours. So we have public access to this icon. And it's a great way for me. I've been on the ship for, I think this is my 38th year I'll be joining the ship. And I get jaded sometimes, I forget. It's just a technical problem, it's my work, I've got to go put my boots on in the morning and go to work. And then I'll meet someone from Alberta who has never thought they would possibly ever sail on the ship or see Nova Scotia from the water. And had been talked about it by their father or their grandfather. And it's certainly a way for me to, you know, reinvest in the ship and in what she actually means. And for the crew, I mean, the faster she's going and the more I can look up and just see teeth from big smiles up on the foredeck. So we do harbor tours. We do port visits. So this year we're going to Halifax. There's a huge sailing event. I think it's the most expensive sporting event coming to Atlantic Canada ever in Sail GP. So these guys go around the world doing NASCAR type racing in harbors. So this is a big worldwide event. So Bluenose will be there. I think we're doing a Premier's Conference this year. We're doing a Francophonie Conference. So sort of big national or big idea conferences. And then we'll go to little places like Canso, like Sailors Harbor, Country Harbor, where there may be 7 houses, right? And you sail in and there's no wharf for us. So you drop the hook and you look at the 7 houses and there's someone standing on every porch. And you watch the school bus come down and one kid gets off and the school bus goes back because that's the end of the road, right? And the kid is standing there with his backpack on and just looking at the ship. And you just think, the ship is a promise of something else, something over the horizon, right? And something that Picton Castle does really well here in town is that they have that promise of it goes somewhere, it does something that we're not party to, is a mystery to that. And I think the Bluenose does that well in her own way when we go to those small ports. And it took me a while to get the office to really understand. I love to sail along the coast close. And it's technically difficult to do, but I see the cars line up. I see them stop and watch and get out and take pictures. And I guess 10 years ago, I think Alan Creaser was the director, and someone called him and asked him to get me to move away the coast because I was causing a traffic jam in St. Margaret's Bay. Right, see, it works. People pay attention. The other thing that's really neat for us is the social aspect of the ship visiting the port. So when we go to Canso, invariably someone comes down and sits down and they just start greeting their friends. And they just sit there for hours and greet their friends, and people come around. And then you hear the conversation start of, do you remember when these schooners came to town? Right? So the community is telling itself their stories again. Right? And those stories, I know when we leave, they'll still happen at the post office for a while. They'll happen, at bingo or wherever the community gets together. It becomes important that they will retell their history through the eye of the Bluenose. And the crew, they become sort of community builders and liaisons in their own way, and that they're interpreting not only the history of the ship, but their life living it actually today. Right? So when we travel from place to place, they get seasick. Right? They get overtired because they're not sleeping well. You can imagine trying to sleep as your bunk was dropping 3 feet and moving away from you. So they become sort of living storytellers of the ship. So shipmate self, we really like to think ourselves, people often look at me and say, oh, you're the captain. No, I'm just the provincial bus driver, right? I'm just the caretaker until the next person comes along. The position is really important, but the person wearing the shoes, maybe not so much, right? So we like to think of the ship as an ongoing thing. Bluenose II has been going for 60 years now, way longer than the original ship did, right? So I think she's got a history of herself that's valuable and should be valued. But if you just took the young people that we have put out into the communities, into their communities across the country, and that goes from doctors, lawyers, mechanics, everything. And I hope when they leave, they understand the work ethic they've been taught. They understand of doing the proper job, and that they will leave something better than when they found it. And the other thing, when you have, this is my last thing, when you have something as big as the Bluenose and an idea as big as the Bluenose, you have to pitch a big tent. And this is something that Emily and I and a gentleman by the name of Alan Creaser discussed for the Bluenose 100. We celebrated the 100th anniversary of the original Bluenose. Is pitch a big tent, make room for everybody to sit. So for that, with using the Bluenose as a focus, you can talk about the history of the fishery. You can talk about shipbuilding, shipping, economics. You can talk about Indigenous history here. You can talk about weather and climate change. physics, math, boat building, ocean sciences, tourism. You can look at marine jobs for young people. I've got any number of young crew that have gone on to be pilots or marine pilots or captains or mates or engineers. So when you have an icon, particularly one that can travel around like the Stanley Cup or the Bluenose, it's important to pitch a big tent and to let everybody in and populate it through the community that you built that way. And that's what I have to say today.